It's me coming on strong. Hope you're feeling blessed no matter where you are. So, I've been busy. Not that you care, right? I've been doing a lot of Galaxy Fair shows, conferences for mediums, psychics, etc. It's been a blast. It's very lucrative to see the light workers in my industry within my side of the world, but also to see how the spirituality factor in most places, and how some are of the light and some are of the false light that I've talked about. Lovely people, but still entrapped by the matrix and still entrapped by their own, egoistic ways. But it's good to see the diversity that comes out. So what I want to talk about is how we just shifted into this age of the fire horse. And I'm not going to get all, astrological on you, but I do believe that for most of us that transitioned in the solar calendar, the Gregorian calendar, January time frame, most of us tripped and fell right after that new year started. It was a pretty tumbling down the hill type of scenario. So I, for myself, feel like I, in the last years, have been kind of bodily attaching and moving into this idea of a 13 lunar cycle, because I feel like my body and my spiritual self is following suit. And I feel like even after we trip and fell down that hill after the Gregorian version of New Year, we picked up speed into the lunar, calendar, which was the fire horse. And I think it's very momentous in a very great way. I don't know. I've come to understand more of the Chinese zodiac as time has gone on. It is more ancient, obviously, and it has an air and follows suit with a lot of what the astrological changes are in our solar system. And what I can say is that we came from the year of the snake. I would say that's about spot on. You know what I'm saying? And the thing about the snake, as I've tried to reveal in the past, is that the snake is also the bearer of wisdom, the bearer of knowledge, because the snake has two sides. You know what I'm saying? There's always that conniving side, but also within the conniving comes a set of truth, because if you know what the conniving side is, or the wrong thing is, you obviously, going down the wrong path, can always find what the right path is and what the right thing is. And I feel like the slithering snake managed to expose a lot of what's wrong with the world, and also shed a lot of knowledge and wisdom as to what was the wrong course or the wrong path, and also the lies, and all of that is very succinct with what's going on right now, right? And as we moved into the fire horse, we're now at a stage where so much is exposed by the year of the snake, that we're moving into this evolution of where I think most of us, in our conviction, in our trajectory, we're moving into this era of conviction. Because the fire horse not only is fast and rapid, but it's ablaze. And also at the same time, because we've seen all the lies, or a lot of them, we're at a stage where we all want the conviction in ourselves, the conviction in the energy, conviction in prosecution. You know what I'm saying? So we are all part of the world, and we all know that the world is set ablaze right now in many, many different ways. But I do want to say this. I know that most of us are ill-hearted when we look at everything that's been divulged with these files. And it is torn across the world and shaped the world in such a way where we literally are seeing the real evil being exposed and expressed in this time of our lives. And it's very, very momentous. But as an individual, I also feel that a lot of nuisances and a lot of negative people and a lot of liars and a lot of like I was saying, the false lighters and everything has been exposed. And as a mother, I can't stand for everything I've seen and heard about these files, and I'm sure a lot of you that have any grain of salt of heart or soul are in the same boat as me. But we're also, as people, fighting and trying to bring the energy to a point of prosecution, to actually prosecute that of which needs to be prosecuted. So I thought a lot about this in these last weeks, because I have been busy, but I noticed that as we are all beings of light and energy, and our emotions also contribute to the overall motion of existence here. And I know you may not believe that, but we're all motions in the ocean of existence, okay? I started thinking to myself, I was like, how do we contribute to this prosecution? How do we solidify this? How do we pin these bastards down to the ground? Because not for nothing, I can't stand by and think that it's okay. And realistically, if I had it my way, they'd all be in a penitentiary with Bubba, and Bubba would be taking them down the Mary Lane every day and showing them what they did to those children. But I do want to make a shout out to three people, the three people I'm putting up here, because 2 years ago, when I was being shown everything about Puff Daddy, when I was being shown about all the different persons in Hollywood, there were three women that stood out to me in my visions that were a little more elaborate, a little more, had a little more breadth behind them. And I'm putting them up again because in the first video where I tried to say who they were, I was still timid and I was still intimidated. It was hard for me to even say my truths. And I think in this era that I'm speaking of, I have to be as upfront as I believe we need to be. I feel that Hillary Clinton, Ellen DeGeneres, and Oprah Winfrey are going to be major players in this. These were people we brought in our homes. These were people that we watched, on television. And the reason, I'm not to say that all those men don't deserve it, but when I saw my visions of what the debauchery was with the men, trust me, it was bad. But I also saw these three women very well in the workings. Ellen was more of like a Hollywood hustling madam, and Hillary and Oprah were kind of African domineering elitists that were grooming and conditioning, and then also selling and what's the word? When you brainwash and you manipulate and cultishly, sacrifice kids. Like, that's what I was seeing. And in the vision, I was being shown both those women, Hillary and Oprah, had, the red cloaks on. And I kept hearing the words, especially for Oprah, that she was a principality. And if any of you know what a principality is, that is a high-ranking demonic, right? But I want to take this, and this is just my words, okay? And I'm just saying, should this be all correct? I hope they get pinned to the wall as well. And I hope that all these persons don't get preferential treatment, don't get to go to white collar jails, and they get to be put on C block and dealt with in a proper instance by all the other persons in jail with them. That would be fitting, but it is unfortunate because the elites that be, those that are named and that have been redacted, are also not just arms dealers, but they are also owners. A lot of these bank heads own a lot of facilities, jails, all across the world. So it's going to be very difficult for us as persons, the collective of all of us, to try to nail these people down and give them the proper treatment they deserve. But what I will say is that even as a collective, what we can do as individuals, and I'm starting to try myself, because as much as we all evolve in our souls, we always are held back by the shadow. We're always held back by the illusions. We're always held back, or not forever, but we're always fighting through, right? And I also, in my own life, feel like the only thing I can do, the only thing we can do, is try to confront these things in our life, because that energy says a lot to the universe. Because if we're confronting the shadows, if we're confronting not all of us are in front of the elitists, not all of us work for the Department of Justice, but what we can do is not just protest, not just fight, but in our own lives, if we actually come and tell the truth and pin certain persons to the wall ourselves in our own lives, that is a contributive force, a contributive element to an equilibrium within this whole, lifescape that we're all intertwined in. And realistically, why I think the fire horse is great, because it's not just knowing what the illusions are, it's not just talking about the illusions, but it's actually pinning people and prosecuting people. And if we're not prosecuting persons in our own world, in our own day-to-day, in our own lives, how do you think this is going to fare for those that have to do the nitty-gritty, dirtier jobs? We think if we sit back and we just complain, or if we sit back and just, voice our opinions online, that is not just something great, yes, but also an energetic transmutation that can occur is if all of us start to do these little nitty-gritty things within our own backyard. So I, for one, want to start, prosecuting the negativity, prosecuting the fake lighters. I am not a fan, and I think that there are so many groupings out there and so many persons I'm meeting and have met that constantly keep selling this story of spirituality as if it's something to sell. And then at the same time, they are othering. And if you don't know what othering is, it's basically when they feel like they're better than you, their groups are better, or their words are better. It's kind of like what the Catholic Church always did, saying that you had to find God through the priests instead of Yeshua, which was blatantly wrong. But what I'm trying to say is that even in the spiritual community, or even in our own regular communities, there's always these persons that are othering the rest of the world. And I think this needs to stop. All these teams and groups and factions of existence need to be brought to light, because that's what the Epstein files is as well. These are factions of elitist demonics just trying to strangle and stronghold the rest of the world. So the way we can contribute as individuals and participants in the collective is to break down those own collectives that we see that are in the wrong, that are not really, showing love and light out there, and that are really just selling themselves and corrupting and violating the laws, the universal laws, and also at the same time siphoning off of their patrons and persons that may not understand that they're being bamboozled. So I know that in the next months or so, I'm going to do my best to confront all of the persons and bodies that I personally feel should be at least brought to some form of justice or exposition, because I don't think it's fair that I have them in my own backyard and I don't confront them, or haven't confronted them, because I'm trying to stay appeasingly in the love and light situation. This fire horse energy is one where we have to start in the prosecution era, because not for nothing, a lot of persons talk about these files and they're like, oh, this is the evil, this is the evil, this is the evil. It is, okay? We're going to talk about evil quickly. And I want to point this out because this is something that people may not understand, is that evil in antiquity was presented in a couple fashions. So here's some pictures to kind of allude to what I'm trying to say. So these are old pictures of what the ancients, what the, let's say during the age of the medieval era, this is how they described demonics. As you can see here, they were either snakes, in a reptilian fashion, or they had scales, period. They weren't these little red chubby babies with horns. They were actually documented as such, and we're going back in antiquity to thousands and thousands of years, even before Christ walked the earth. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes when we look at this disgusting depravity, and I don't know how far into the Epstein files you've gone, but they're even, and this was something else I saw in my channelings a long time back, was that I always saw this thing about like basically taking children's organs and, sending them off around the world. I saw a lot of children trafficking, especially within the Asian countries, like let's say Indonesia, Thailand, things of that nature. Not to say it wasn't happening everywhere else, but it was like as if like certain communities, certain countries, Africa as well, but these were all organs that were being sent around the world to be trafficked, not just in human form for sexual endeavors, but also for whatever, pray tell, was the reasoning for that. But maybe it was for donations, for donating, let's say if these elitists were dying and they needed fresh like livers and hearts and whatever. But then what gets even creepier is that when you go into these Epstein files and they start talking about the killing of children and the killing of basically babies, children, and sacrifices, right? This ties into a couple things, okay? In antiquity, they always said that there were sacrifices, even in the Incas and the Mayas did this. But it was also well known that in terms of like trying to obtain earthly powers or like godly powers, you would ingest certain animals. You would eat a cheetah heart, for example. Or if you wanted to be stronger than most men, you would sacrifice persons, because that would give you this godly sacrifice to give to the gods. And the gods would then shine on you and give you like godly abilities. Or you would drink the blood, because I think who has it right is like when you look at, like, I think it's Islamic traditions, they don't even have blood in their meat. I think they call it halal, and they're probably closest to understanding that there's something about blood that is really what is necessary to amplify or to dampen. And that is true. I am a meat eater, not a big meat eater, but I've tried to cut down over the years. But realistically, the most authentic self would not eat. We're not carnivores. Our teeth even dictates this. We're meant to be omnivores, or even just like there's all versions of us here. There's vegetarians, breatharians, fruitarians, vegans, etc. Okay, but for the most part, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, why would these persons want children? Because A, they have the most cleanest blood. 2, they're the closest in soul spark to God and to the Creator, and they felt perhaps that there was an empowerment that would come from children. Also, at the same time, too, what I also want to point out, like I have with these other pictures of demons, and you may not understand and you may not believe, but if you ever do get your hands on some thermal goggles, the ones that the military use, you'd be very surprised at what you see on this planet. And what I'm trying to say is that, especially when it came to those 3 women I was talking about, why they were trafficking children, why they were killing children. Not for nothing, I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s, and there were guys like Geraldo, and there was Sally Jesse Raphael, Ricky Lake, Montel Williams. These shows used to have a lot of culty styled, elitist styled families come on, and children were basically talking about, at times, like, you have to understand, I only saw maybe a handful of these stories in my lifetime. I'm not talking about Jerry Springer shit. I'm talking about like these live talk shows where they would have children talking about them being brought to certain houses, certain places in the world, going to these parties, and then partaking in these satanic rituals, and then watching other children get killed in front of children. Not only were they being raped, they were being asked to watch other children get killed in front of them. This happened on multiple talk shows in my lifetime. So I know that when these Epstein files came out, these were things that people were giving us red flags for many, many, many years, especially within Hollywood, especially the children that were child stars, talking about all the crazy shit they were seeing as child stars growing up in the industry. But I'm not saying it's just the industry that's tampered with. It's obviously the elitists around the world. Now, I will point out this. Like I said about humans and how we eat, okay? So, for example, what do we eat as, let's say, meat eaters? What's some of the best meat we have? Oh, yeah, that's right, veal. What is veal? Veal is a baby calf that is basically fattened up, has its knees, conked out so it can't really walk around, and it's short-lived, and it's fattened up and then murdered. And I don't eat veal. I don't eat a lot of different meats. I try my best not to, but I'm saying if you want to have a very sanctified vessel, which is the one you're in, right, the best thing we can all do is try to be as close to vegetarianism as possible, or even a Mediterranean diet. That's kind of what I like, pescatarian / a little fowl here and there, but I'm not really into the red blood meats, the pork, etc. And I think that's what Yeshua was after, and what Buddha was after, and all these other, different religions were kind of pointing out what animals not to eat. Not because they weren't delicious, that's not it. It's because they're ensouled animals, right? And realistically, if the closer you want to get to your soul, to understanding spirit, or to working with your vessel as it was meant to work, there was a corruption that was brought to us at a certain point of our evolution as human beings, that we were told and sold that we needed to eat meat to survive. But that's actually not true. You can watch many a documentary that expresses this, that you can get most of your proteins from legumes, etc., that you don't really need. And protein is also found in different, not just nuts, seeds, etc., but you can find them in many different ways, even with dairy, which doesn't even hurt the animals and that vegetarians use. But what I'm trying to say is that imagine if we as human beings eat veal, or as we as human beings go out there and murder elephants and rhinoceros for their tusks, etc., and we have humans on this planet that just go after endangered species for sport. And it's really gross and disgusting, but there are these humans out there that really feel like big men and big women when they go and kill all these endangered species and exotic animals. Now imagine if these demonics, right, as I placed earlier, let's just call them by that name, but let's just say there might be a different faction of them named a different name. We do have a part of the brain of them in our own skulls as we speak, called the reptilian brain, just saying. Because reptiles have been around longest, but I digress. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if there was a form of demonic elitism that is happening on this planet, what animal or what type of animal would they want to eat? Now, we could see it as only that they would sacrifice humans, but what type of humans would they want to sacrifice? What would be the most delectable? Any thoughts, guys? Just putting that out there. But I don't want to scare anybody, and I don't want anybody to think that all of these, demonics or reptilians are, there's probably both. There's negative thought forms, there's negative energy, there's negative entities, period. But I'm saying, let's just say there's more than one. They have all shades of different names, on this planet. Some of you believe that they don't exist, but hey, we didn't think that all of these ass cracks existed either, that they were selling children and killing children and sacrificing children and drinking their blood either. So let's just put, semantics away and say that maybe we don't know as much as we think we do. And let's just say if there were this faction of demonic reptilian styled beings, they might like children just like we like veal. Just saying. But what I'm trying to say is that not all of them are bad. There are some that are very humanized, and just like humans, they eat differently. There are those that, try to stay on a less children-based diet. And personally, the fact that all of this is being brought to light, I think, is very telling, because there are always going to be bad and good humans. There's always going to be bad and good interstellar beings, okay? And here's the thing. You guys might all come at me and be like, oh my gosh, is this woman talking about aliens? But it's okay to talk about demons. But it's okay when we look in the books of our history how they refer to demons. No, it's okay to put a chubby little baby with horns. That's more practical, right? But in antiquity, over and over and over again, they kept referring to them this way, drawing them this way, and maybe we just lost sight of history. Just saying. But let's just say for argument's sake, there are those that are maybe more humanistic, have been intertwined with human capabilities, have hair, look very much like us. However, they don't have a heat frequency or show up on those sensors or goggles much like humans do. And that's one way to figure that out. If you have a third eye, you do see them phase in and out when you do come in contact. They're not as common as you think, but they are in different parts of this world more predominantly. But what I'm trying to say is that all of this is coming to light, this sick, disgusting, depraved behavior of evil, demonic, whatever you want to call it, because it's just gross overall. Like, how can we even sit here as human beings, as parents, even believing that this exists? And it does. And what I will say, as a previous law clerk who did at an old law firm, actually, I won't name names, but I had 3 Weinstein cases that I had to redact for Miramax Canada myself. And what I will say is that in the course of redaction, you only redact the victims' names. You don't redact the prosecuted party. Right? Because when it comes to any depraved, like let's say in the cases of these persons that I had to redact these cases, the person was suing them for compensation, because there's 2 ways you could do it: in a civil way or in a criminal way, right? You could sue the person, like let's say, for example, you attempt to press charges. It doesn't really go very far because Miramax Canada has got a lot of lawyers. You can simply sue in a civil case, and based on common law, there are parameters and monies to be handed out in reparations of what we call tort, and a person can sue a person for that vilifying behavior. That might be the easier approach when you're up against so many lawyers. But what I'm trying to say is, as the law clerks who saw all these files originally, I asked out to the universe that they, pray tell, just leak all this information to someone. You might have signed an NDA, but it's about time we work outside of the NDAs. And I think as more time passes, as individuals in this collective unity here, if you are, let's say, somehow affiliated with any of these files, why not take it to the next step of prosecution, just like the rest of us who will need to prosecute those in our own backyard of whatever state that you are faced in, because that will help edge things over energetically to get things achieved. Because you have to understand, to prosecute is very difficult. We can say ray, 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 rah, rah, rah from our seats behind a screen. But to actually be a person to call someone out, to actually be a person to call and maybe not get murdered in the process, because these are very serious people. And right now, one of the 3 women I'm talking about is trying to get in front of it. Isn't she smart? She's really smart. Because when you are, working in this demonic ring or reptilian ring or whatever you want to call it, elitist subjugation of evil, the smarter move is to get in front of it so that the brunt of the hit is not, it's like you end up getting to point fingers. Yes, you take some blame, but you get to point a lot of fingers and take a lot of persons down. And that's actually a smart place to be. However, she's probably going to try to spin it as best as she can to, kind of make the playing field a little more confused. Because even if Bill and Hillary go and testify, they could try to smooth things out as best as they can, not just on their behalf, but to cover the asses of those that are interested in being covered. So it's like they're a buffer for what is to come. And it's more important to get the victims to be participants in this and take them as seriously as possible. And then at the same time, to those redactions by the clerks, and I mean there's probably tons of them, tons of clerks that did this, because there's I don't know how many files, like we're talking thousands and thousands upon thousands of pages of redactions that maybe AI did some, but maybe AI wasn't up and running at the time. So this went into the hands of many different clerks across the United States and potentially Canada and every other country that has ever had any type of lawsuits. It mostly going to be suing in a civil case setting to redact these disgusting files. So I really put out to the universe, please, if you were a clerk or a legal assistant that had to do this, just break the NDA, just help it along. I hope someone of you see this. I don't know, my reach only goes so far, but who knows? Maybe you might be married and 6 degrees of separation, you might know a clerk and you might inspire. But as individuals, we could do our own type of prosecution for all the negativity, for all the naysayers, for all the liars, for all the cheats, for all the false slave, for all the otherers, trying to minimize all the people of this planet. Like, there's so many groupings of all these organizations that just want people to be so small and not give them the empowerment that they need and siphon off of everyone's energy. It's ridiculous, but it's true. Because if these people are not helping you, they're hindering you. And if they're hindering you, they're siphoning your energy. If that is money, time, effort, what have you. And that's the real test, because if you're not gaining anything from somebody, or you're not learning anything from somebody, and they're just like bigging themselves up and making it seem like they know how to do it and you can too, only if you give everything you have to them, that's kind of like Scientology 101, just saying, or what they call a Ponzi scheme. There's so many of these people out there that I see in this online scape that are literally like, oh, I made $1 million and I'll show you how. You know how they're doing it? It's so simple. And I started, kind of ratting some out on Quora and different things, but it's like this. They made $1 million because they convinced you to come to their meetup, okay? And then they're going to show you how you can convince another grouping of people to pay into your meetup. It's called a Ponzi scheme. So they say to you, oh, you want to be a coach? I'll show you how to make $30,000 in clients. All they're really doing is getting you to buy into it for like a big price tag of like 5 G's, because they've already made it to that Ponzi scheme, top of the pyramid thing. I don't know if you guys were ever in sales, but that's how it works. And then when they're at the top of the pyramid, they charge you $5,000. And then when you go to their seminars, they're going to show you how to do the same scheme on another group of people. And the Ponzi scheme continues. It's not going to bring you enlightenment. It's not going to bring you higher. You're just leapfrogging off of the backs of other humans that were so needing and wanting to get to a higher place monetarily, socially, whatever the case may be. But realistically, what you're just doing is piggybacking and using the same tactics they used that were used on them. They were used on them from a big Ponzi schemer at the top that's been trickling down. Okay? This has been going on for generations, if not hundreds and hundreds of years. That's what it's called. That's what's happening. And I really can't stand when I see this happening in a spiritual setting. When people are like, I'll teach you how to manifest. Sure you will, because you're teaching them how to manifest a Ponzi scheme. Oh, I'll show you how to find God. Sure you will, because you're going to Ponzi scheme them into bringing them to enlightenment. It's gotten to the point where when I do see these groupings, I do add in and I do comment all through the time I'm in these chats until I'm kicked out. And I'm saying that I'm going to keep doing this. And if there are persons within my life that I need to go toe to toe with or in front of their faces and say, you're full of shit. You're not love and light. You're othering people. Because realistically, love and light and understanding and acceptance, it means all races, all colors, all walks of life. Not those that can get you somewhere. Not those that are liars and schemers and did the same Ponzi scheme that you're trying to perpetrate. I'm tired of seeing this, and I know that you guys are tired of seeing this. And how do we get those Epstein files into prosecution, persecution, to a finality that of a deserving, end game, instead of 5 months in jail and a big fine, or plastic surgery and a relocation? It has to end somewhere. So I feel like as individuals, the best thing we can do is try to point out the losers, the liars, the advantageous thieves within our own backyard. Because realistically, how we edge the energy so that the persons that are in the place that can condemn, that can bring down all these other assholes through all this sick, depraved, I don't even have a word for it. It's not just demonic, it's disgusting. And it needs to end. You know what I'm saying? But I don't work for the DOJ. I'm not in the cabinet. I'm not in, a high-ranking official. But I do know that I am a spiritual official in some respect, and I'm a human being that has a mouth. Peace, that is. So I will do my best to confront all of those that I see and try to shed light to those that don't see. And I think that's the best way we can all do our own, domino effect or some type of snowball effect in this grand scheme of prosecution, persecution, and finality, using the fire horse energy that we are being given in this year. Especially as I'm not an astrologist, but when I did start reading about this time and era, even when it came to pass the last time, so many major things took place during that time of the fire horse. And right now, which is very interesting, not only do we have the solar and the lunar equinox that took place, and it's like, here's, feminine and masculine energies coalescing into a yin and yang form. That means that there's two sides of that coin being met. That's also very powerful. And then not to mention that we were moving into Aquarius in a stage of, like, I think it was like 0 degrees of Aquarius, which means that there's a lot of exposition when it comes to let's say intuition, etc., because the water bearers of this, let's say Pisces, Aquarius, I forget what the other one is, it brings forth a lot of intuition or opening of discernment for a lot of persons. And I will say what I found that was really beautiful in the last little while, which just happened, I think a week or two ago, is finally in Britain, all these older age persons that I've mentioned before, who would have been part of the last love generation, the last age of Aquarius, they were the ones who were sitting in the protests during the times of Nam and during the times of trying to bring peace to the world at a very raggedy state back in the 60s. And those same persons were then protesting now for Palestine and Gaza within England, and they were getting called terrorists, and they were being persecuted, and they were being put in jail and then taken out, and then protesting again that genocide is wrong. And we're talking like elderly people holding signs. And what I'm saying is that the legislation within Britain finally got overturned, that if you should want free speech to protest, which is a human right, that you will be granted and not be called a domestic terrorist anymore, or a terrorist at that fact either. So it means that with a peaceful demeanor and just saying it like it is, or just saying what is wrong and just sticking to it and just like trying to take down the real injustices in our own backyards, it can happen. And this came into play not too long ago, and there's so many different protests that are happening in a peaceful way. So I'm not trying to enforce people to be like, hey, let's just point fingers and get all outraged. That's definitely not it. When I was on all those posts, I did it very diligently. I just pointed out, maybe as like my play usually is that I'll play stupid. So I'll be on these chats and I'll be like, so what you're saying is that if I pay you $5,000, that I go to your courses, and then when I'm in your courses, you teach me how to get other people to pay me $5,000. So really all I need to do is go find out how to charge people $5,000 each, just like you're doing right now. And trust me, I said it in a way that was so baby-esque that it really started getting other people involved, and they were like, yeah, kind of. And then you started seeing a couple people fall off. And then, as time went on, I was like, oh, okay, so you guys do the class, and then I have the class as like I get a piece of paper, but then I can go charge people just like you're charging me right now. I just kept doing that all through the chat. And eventually, I might not have brought light to everyone. There's still people that fell for it. But I'm just saying, it's like little things like that. And it doesn't have to be in a mean, aggressive way. It just has to be in a way to open people's eyes. Because realistically, if you're paying into all of these things, or if you're listening to people that are othering and literally saying, I'm up here and you're down here and you have to pay me to reach this, or if you pay this you can get enlightened, or I'll show you how to get enlightened, or I'll show you how to manifest. Realistically, you're paying for their manifestation. Of course they're going to have $1 million because you paid $1 million, not you by yourself. But what I'm trying to say, you get enough people that are jonesing to find $1 million in their life, and you pay them in essence the $1 million so that they can go broadcast how they made $1 million. They just convinced you to give them the money. That's all it is. It's not manifestation. It's called manipulation. And that's what's happening in this world. Manipulation. So we need to move it from lies, deceit, manipulation to prosecution. So I think in this era, the main takeaway I could say about the energy that we're all sitting in, living in, watching in, is that maybe it's time for us to persecute, prosecute. That is which of what we see and is in our backyard. And that'll help the energy to get the bigger ass wipes, the bigger assholes prosecuted, take this muck off of the streets of the world and put them there with Bubba in C Block, and let them get pinned every day, and let them get persecuted, and let them get treated like assholes. Or maybe, just maybe, they should be sacrificed just the same. Just saying. I'm not God. I shouldn't judge. But I'm just saying, if it is true if the energy is to take that fire horse energy and move it through in this next year to finalize, to bring a full circle moment, a cycle ending, I think it starts with us. And I think it starts with us peacefully opening eyeballs and saying like it is. And I hope to be doing this in this year. And I hope you do too. Love you lots. That's my time.